Hello and welcome to the final How Do You Answer video for the Crime and Punishment series. In the previous videos we have looked at how do you answer a 9-mark and a 10-mark question, and now we are on to our final long essay question in the Crime and Punishment paper, which will be the biggest 18-mark question. Okay, so we're going to talk about what the 18-mark question looks like, how do you go about planning it, and how do you actually answer it, and what a good answer will look like once you've written it down. So, first step, as ever, is always to work out what the question is asking you. Now, with the 18-mark question, it will always give you an overarching statement in commas, in quotation marks, sorry, and it will ask you, how far do you agree with this statement? So, for example, if we were to work out the focus of this question, the most significant changes to the punishment of offenders happened in the period after 1900. How far do you agree? Give reasons for your answer. You would need to get your highlighter out or your pen out, and you would need to circle what the statement is actually telling you that you then need to go away and agree or disagree with. So have a little think about the question that's on the board. See if you can work out what exactly it wants you to go away and answer. What is the theme? What is the time period? Have a go at that now. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at that then. So in this particular example, the two bits that I would highlight are the fact that it's talking about the most significant changes to the punishment of offenders. So it wants you to talk about important changes to punishment. And then it's saying that this person thinks that those most important changes happened in the period after 1900. Now, again, it hasn't explicitly told you the name of that time period, but we should know from our revision that that is the modern period. So this question is saying the biggest changes to punishment happened in the modern period. Do you agree, yes or no? Now, unlike other questions where I told you that you must explicitly stick to the time period in the question, this question actually wants you to compare changes in the modern period to changes in other time periods outside of the modern period. This question is testing your ability to compare themes across huge chunks of time in the Crime and Punishment unit. Therefore, to compare them, you have to talk about other time periods. And we'll look at what that looks like in practice when we come to look at the model answer at the end. So, next step, as ever with the GCSE questions, is to actually start planning it. Come up with a little plan in your head, and this again is where your retrieval knowledge is going to come in, because the more you've practiced retrieving that knowledge at home as part of your revision, the easier you will find it to recall it in the exam, because it will be embedded in your long-term memory. So how do you actually go about structuring the answer to this question? Well, unlike the 9-mark and the 10-mark question, you are going to need an introduction for this. However, the introduction for the 18-mark question is really, really short. It's one sentence, simply using the wording of the question, stating whether you agree or disagree. So overall, I agree with the statement that, ... or overall, I disagree with the statement that, ... Don't need to go into any more detail yet. The bulk of your essay is going to consist of 4 paragraphs, 4 peel paragraphs that link back to the question. Now, when you are structuring these 4 paragraphs, there must be an element of balance in your argument. Even if you completely outright agree or disagree, you must acknowledge the other side of the argument, because if you don't, you are not weighing up the different sides of the argument before making your judgment, and therefore you can't access those top marks. So how could you structure your paragraphs to show that you're balancing your argument? Well, you could split it right down the middle. In your 4, you could go, here are 2 reasons that I agree, here are 2 reasons that I disagree. If you were more inclined to agree, then you could say, actually, here are 3 reasons that I agree in paragraph 1, 2, and 3, and here's 1 reason to disagree, just so you're acknowledging the other side of the argument. Or if you were more likely to disagree, you could do 1 agree and then 3 disagree. What you can't do is 4-0. So you couldn't do 4 agree, 0 disagree. You couldn't do 4 disagree, 0 agree. There's got to be a balance in there on some level. Now, because the statement is giving you the focus, you must start off with agreeing. It's easiest to agree to begin with. Even if you disagree overall, you must start off with agreeing to show the examiner that you've at least considered the statement's argument. Because if you don't, then you're not really answering the question, okay? So you must start off with agreeing, or an example that does agree. Then, to finish off, you must end up with a despite judgment that weighs up your arguments and offers a firm conclusion. Excuse me. So by this, I don't mean necessarily just repeating whatever was in your answer, in your different answers, and just kind of rehashing the same words again. It's in your judgment conclusion that you need to come up with an overall opinion. So you need to weigh up the different arguments that you've presented in your essay, and you need to come down on a firm conclusion whilst acknowledging the different sides. So we call it a despite judgment in class, where you start off with saying, despite the fact that some people might agree because of this, this, and this, overall it is clear that the evidence is pointing actually towards this side. So you need to have that firm conclusion. Now, the despite judgment is only going to be the cherry on top of your answer. It can get you the 18th mark out of 18. However, if you are pushed for time, we strongly recommend that you do not rush any of your 4 main paragraphs to get onto a conclusion, because you can't get the 18th mark with a despite judgment unless you have already met the criteria for the 4 different paragraphs beforehand. So it's kind of like a ladder. You can't just jump straight to the top with a conclusion and think, great, that's going to get me the 18th mark. You need to go up through the different paragraphs first before you get there. So it is better, if you are struggling for time, to focus on those 4 paragraphs before jumping onto your conclusion. What skills do you need to demonstrate then in terms of actually answering this? Well, you need to identify relevant examples to the different time periods that you're talking about. You need to offer some supporting detail to those identified examples and describe them. So again, that could be dates, statistics, definitions. And then most importantly, just like in the 10-mark question, you need to actually explain how that example is answering the question. So how is that example that you've used demonstrating that this time period did see a significant change or didn't see a significant change? Okay. Right, how should I actually go about writing my answer then? So you've worked out the focus. You've come up with a plan of your agree and disagree. You could do that in a little table at the top of your exam sheet. However you want to do it is fine. But try and think of 2 or 3 reasons for each side of the argument that you could include in your answer. Now's the hard bit. You need to actually start putting that down on paper. So if the question in blue was the question that you had in your exam, the most significant changes to the punishment of offenders happened in the period after 1900. How far do you agree? Use the wording of the question, just like all of the others, to actually start you off and give you the first sort of words that you're going to need to put down. So if you were to start off with agreeing, because that is what you should do, to acknowledge the statement that they've put forward to you in the exam, to show the examiner that you have at least considered the argument being presented to you. So if I was to use the wording of the question, I would start off with, on the one hand, I agree that the most significant changes to the punishment of offenders happened in the period after 1900. For example, and this is where I would identify a significant change to punishment in this time period. Then I need to include some supporting detail about what that change of punishment actually is. So this is where I would say this was when, and I would include some dates, statistics, definitions, key people, anything that you can use to support whatever example you've just brought into the argument. Then, again, you need to use the wording of the question. It's telling you that the most significant changes of punishment happened in the modern period. You need to actually explain why that change you've identified is an important change. So you need to tell the examiner why this is a big deal. Why is that change to punishment a big deal at that time? Think about what it had been like in previous time periods compared to what it was like in this time period that you're now talking about. Why is that a big deal? Why do historians care about that? Then, to show the examiner that you've constantly thought about the question and to tie up your answer, link it back to the question with the connective therefore. So therefore, my identified point was a very significant change to the punishment of offenders during the modern period because ... Okay? So let's actually look at what a good answer would look like. So you've got the question that's the same at the top of the screen there. You then got answer A on the left-hand side, and you've got 2 paragraphs, so sort of half of the answer that this candidate has given. What I would like you to do is I would like you to read through the answer to find the following things. Where do they identify a change in punishment? Where do they describe or offer some supporting detail that just supports what that change actually is? And where do they then explain the significance of that change in punishment during that time period? So what I would like to do, read through example A, pause the video here, identify the change, show me where they describe or offer supporting detail, and then think about where they explain the significance. Again, if you've got an iPad or you're listening on a phone, you could screenshot this screen and then you could edit the photo to highlight the different parts if you want, or you can think about it obviously in your head if that's easier. Once you've done that, okay, I would then like you to have a look at the mark scheme on the right hand side and have a go at putting that answer in that mark scheme. Where, if this is all somebody had written in an exam, where would it fit in? Okay. I'm going to give you the opportunity to pause the video now then, so that you can have a go going away and reading that. We'll come back in a few seconds time, and then we'll talk about what this answer does well. Okay, right, hopefully you've had a chance to pause the video and have a read through that then. So let's actually go through each paragraph and see where the identifications are, the descriptions, and where the explanations are. So if we start off, on the one hand, I agree that the most significant changes to the punishment of offenders happened in the modern period. For example, the abolition of the death penalty in 1965. So here they have identified a change in punishment. They're talking about the abolition, so the ending of the death penalty in 1965. Right there, they've identified a point. So if we have a look at our mark scheme, straight away they've jumped into this second band because they have identified a change to punishment. But at this point in time, they haven't offered any explanation. So I would write next to this ID, and I'd be saying that they're at 4 marks because they've identified one change to punishment. They go on. The death penalty was abolished as a result of changing public attitudes towards execution as a form of punishment after controversial events such as the Derek Bentley case and increased psychological understanding of criminals. So here they have offered some description and supporting detail of what that change actually is. So they're talking about the Derek Bentley case in England, and they're talking about the improved psychological understanding of why people commit crimes, which leads to the abolition of the death penalty. Now, at the moment, they're not explaining why that was a very significant change. They're just offering some supporting detail about what that change was. So at the moment, they haven't yet moved up into this 7 to 9 marks because they haven't explained that example. They're still at about 4-ish marks. This was a very significant change in the punishment of offenders, as capital punishment had been used for centuries to punish the most serious crimes as a form of deterrence and retribution. However, prison is now the most serious punishment and is used to try and reform and re-educate serious criminals by giving them skills and qualifications. So here they use the wording of the question about significant changes to actually argue why the abolition of the death penalty is a very big deal. It's a huge change because capital punishment had been used for centuries. So they're referring here to different time periods. Right from medieval England, we've studied about how capital punishment is used to punish really serious crimes. However, now with the abolition of the death penalty in the modern period, prison is now the most serious punishment that offender can face. And it's not to try and just get retribution or to deter other criminals, but it's to try and re-educate them and break that kind of cycle of crime that they might be involved in. So they are arguing, actually, yes, the modern period did see one of the most significant changes to the punishment of offenders. So because they have fully explained that example, I would put that at the top of the 9 marks because that is one identified and explained example. That's a very good start. Let's see if they can carry it on. However, I also disagree. So now they've done their agree, but now they're going on to say, actually, I don't think that the modern period saw the most important changes. I disagree with the statement as the early modern period saw very significant changes to the punishment of offenders, such as the introduction of the bloody code. So here they have identified a change in punishment in a different time period. They're no longer saying the modern period. They're saying the early modern period actually saw the biggest changes. For example, the bloody code. We would expect them to now offer some supporting detail about what the bloody code is. The bloody code was a series of laws from 1723 that increased the number of crimes punishable by death to over 200 offences. That is your supporting detail. They're talking about what the bloody code actually is. They've included a date, they've included some statistics about what that law actually does. Now, we want them to actually use the wording of the question and link it back to the question by explaining why actually this change was a very significant change in the early modern period, disagreeing with the question. So, this was a very significant change to the punishment of offenders as it included many crimes previously considered petty and increased the likelihood that petty criminals could be executed instead of sent to a jail or fined. This system stayed in place throughout early modern period and into the industrial period. Therefore, the introduction of the bloody code suggests the early modern period actually saw the most significant changes to the punishment of offenders. So here what they've done is they've explained why this change at this time actually means that that statement in the question perhaps you could disagree with. It's not that the modern period saw the most important changes, the early modern period also saw very important changes. So here, because they have now identified and explained 2 different examples very well, I would argue that this goes up to 12 marks. If this was all they had written, that would be the end of it. They get 12 marks. They haven't got an introduction, which is a shame. It's not the be all and end all, but it does just help the examiner keep track of where your argument is going. And they would need 2 more paragraphs. Because they've already got a balance in there, they've already done 1 agree and disagree, it wouldn't matter now if they went on to do 2 more disagree, because they have at least acknowledged the statement. If they had just gone into straight away disagreeing and then done 2 more disagreeing, that would be a problem and you wouldn't get the top marks, because if you look at the mark scheme, has to be a balance, either 1-3 or 3-1. They haven't got a conclusion because they haven't got that far yet, so we're not going to worry about that. I would want this person to go away and do 2 more paragraphs at least before worrying about the conclusion, so it stays at this 12 marks. Hopefully you found this useful then. The 18 mark question is obviously the longest question, but once you've got your head around how to structure it, it's pretty straightforward. You just need to make sure you are constantly referring back to the question. If it talks about something being significant, make sure you are explaining why that is significant, okay? Hopefully you found this useful. Go away and practice your time periods and the crime, punishment and law enforcement for those time periods. And if you have any further questions about the 18 mark question, please come and chat to your class teacher, who will be happy to show you some more examples or help you through it. Thank you very much for watching.